to make it so that we can't understand any of this, and you get a conspiracy kind of a theory element to it. Then you have this idea that, well, maybe if you somehow soften the boundaries of what we consider to be our dimensional framework, that these different things all suddenly manifest because maybe these things are all coming from the same non-space that surrounds us. And this is where I think, you know, it gets a little dangerous, because what ends up happening invariably, regardless of the actual connection, you get this situation like with the Skinwalker Ranch site and the research that went on there, where at one point it looks like something that's interesting is going on, and then it looks like, well, it doesn't really, we don't really know what we're looking at that point, because it just kind of gets murky. So if we want to talk about the trickster historically, I mean, where do you actually start to define what that means?
Well, the first place that you have to start is to look at the actual term, which I don't really feel completely comfortable with. I think there's a lot of problems when you look at this subject because of the knee-jerk response I think that people have just to the very term trickster. Right. First of all, it's a fairly recent word in the English language. It was actually thought up by an anthropologist named Daniel Brinton back in the 1870s, and I tried to find the actual first usage of the term, and it's funny. He refers to the term, but I can't find any evidence of where he actually coined the term. So, you know, the very inception of the word is kind of cloudy, and we really can't nail it down when he actually came up with that term. So I think that just by its very nature, the trickster, even in terms of the definition and the actual word, I think that there's tricksterism going on even there. But I think that you really have to start with, and I kind of made a point of this at the beginning of the book, that I took Carl Jung's archetype, the concept of the archetype, and how Jung applied the concept of the archetype to various primordial forms that Jung thought inhabit the collective unconscious. And basically, Jung, of course, was a star pupil of Sigmund Freud, and he took Freud's idea of the unconscious a step further by coming up with the idea that possibly there's a collection or constellation of basic symbols that exist collectively in the collective unconscious. And some of these archetypes are like the shadow, the anima, the animus, the trickster, gods, goddesses, the hero. There's a number of them that Jung postulated are found in the deep unconscious, cultural unconscious of all peoples around the world, and that we all share these basic primal symbols. And so I think for my purposes in studying this particular form or energy, if you will, I kind of had to establish a starting point, and that's where I established my starting point is with Jung's idea of archetypal symbols within the collective unconscious. And I think if you look at the actual subject, you'll find that it has various phases that it has gone through, from prehistory, from thousands and thousands of years ago to the present day. And one of the things that I encountered early on when I was doing my initial research into various anthropological views or definitions of what an actual trickster form is, one thing that I found right off was that most anthropologists all agree, if not all of them, agree that the trickster is a static form, and that most of these primal archetypes that we have are fairly static, in that they don't really evolve. And the other thing that I found that most of these anthropologists share in terms of their thinking is that the trickster is unconscious, that it is not self-aware. And one of the first things that I did in the book is refute that. My thinking on this is that we live in an evolving universe, and everything evolves at some rate or another. And so I just automatically made the jump that the trickster is also evolving. And if the trickster is evolving, then perhaps the trickster is also becoming self-aware. And I think that this is a very important departure point that allows me, to make leaps that I don't think have been made before in terms of looking at the trickster energy, looking at manifestations of tricksterism throughout history, and also establishing various stages, I think, that the trickster has gone through in this evolutionary process that it appears to me to be undergoing. So that's kind of where I think you have to start with it. It is an ancient, probably the most ancient form or deep archetypal force within the collective that actually has a face on it. The older archetypes, like the shadow and the anima and the animus, in the mother, for instance, don't particularly have like a face or a personality attached to them. The mother, a good example would be the thousands of Venus figures that have been found in paleo sites. Most of these figures, I've never seen one actually that actually has facial features on it. So the trickster is the first and the oldest of these primal forms that actually has a personification attached to it. So that is the place that you got to start.
Well, let's rewind there for a minute, because part of what it sounds like you're describing, this is an attempt to understand what you mean by trickster, is that it almost sounds like ancient humans created this mechanism of interacting with the elements of nature they didn't understand. And they imbued these elements of nature with powers because they saw that nature had an ability, well before humans' technology, to control nature the way that we, to some extent, think we control it now. But we're talking about a time where humans were much more prone to the effects of, for example, the elements, where it seemed like the earth had this incredible power over the destiny and the fate of humans, and because of humans' lack, or what we think was their lack of technological sophistication, that they then saw the earth and aspects of the earth and creatures of the earth as these mysterious things. They didn't know about evolution. They didn't have our scientific understanding. So, I mean, you talk about archetypes. I always go back to the Aborigines and the rainbow serpent, where you have this this very specific image that is related to an earthly creature, a serpent, but is imbued with these mystical entities. It's a rainbow serpent, and supposedly it goes back to the idea of the formation of the universe. It becomes part of their mythology for creation. And we see that the snake reappears over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like in everything from biblical imagery to the whole UFO enigma, where I remember early on seeing illustrations of a supposed occupant encounter where these creatures were wearing suits, and on the suits was an embroidered logo of like a winged serpent. And that takes us to Quetzalcoatl and that whole aspect of Mexican mythology. But I guess what I'm getting at there, Chris, is that are you differentiating this idea of a trickster with no face from humans' attempts to understand nature and to imbue elements of nature with mythical qualities?
Yes, I think partially yes. I think the easy answer would be yes, but I think you have to kind of look at how the trickster is actually divided into three basic categories. The earliest and most primordial category, or manifestation, as you have been describing, would be the anthropomorphized animal form that somehow changes Gaia or changes nature for the betterment of humanity. And this form of trickster, I think, is the most ancient and the most primordial. And you have examples worldwide. I mean, I think the listeners really need to be reminded here that, again, this is a worldwide phenomenon. And
give us some examples of the history.
Sure.
Of that. Say some references there.
Exactly. Well, Coyote, of course, is probably the most well-known trickster, at least to us here in North America. Coyote is not a trickster form found throughout North America, but in the Southwest and places where coyotes, I think, are most prevalent. Coyote has a special place in Native American lore. And Coyote is often talked about in myths and legends as being a person. And you have this interesting juxtaposition of Coyote the animal And little brother and older brother. Often humans are considered to be related to Coyote. And Coyote, of course, is an important figure in Native American creation myths. Another good example would be Raven. Raven is a trickster form that is very important in the West Coast Native American tradition. And one of the things that Raven is known for in these stories is that Raven was the one responsible for actually creating light. And prior to Raven, humanity existed in a state of darkness. And Raven changed Gaia and introduced light as a way to help humanity progress onward so that they would have a better quality of life. And there's other examples of animal forms around the world. Anansi, the spider trickster, is responsible for agriculture. This is an African form. Anansi is responsible for agriculture, introduced the fishing hook, for instance. One of the things that you'll find in looking at the primordial trickster forms is that the animal forms tend to change Gaia for the betterment of humanity, and then you kind of have this development or progression into a tragic hero type trickster who introduces technology to humanity. And Loki, of course, the Scandinavian trickster, is an example of this, introduced the fishing net. Maui, one of the Kappas in the Polynesian tradition, pushed the sun up further in the sky so that humans had more daylight with which to utilize. Again, you have this interesting attributional quality that ancient man gave tricksters in terms of helping better their lives, either by introducing technology or by causing, somehow causing nature to change for the betterment of humanity. So these are the most ancient types of trickster forms. And then as we progress in our conversation, of course, we'll talk about some of the more contemporary or not primordial trickster types.
You hear it on TV, you hear it on radio, cash for gold. Yes, it's an enticing phrase during these challenging days, but the real question is, how much cash are you going to get for your gold and silver? Are you going to get the best value? Well, you can get the best price from a company whose owners have decades of experience in the business. Welcome to Goldbug. The folks at Goldbug warn you that many of those high-budget gold buyers are paying far less than you deserve for your gold and silver. Goldbug will give you top dollar each and every time. To learn more, call 1-866-596-6134. That number again, 1-866-596-6134 for Goldbug. Or visit us online at goldbug.com. That's Goldbug with 2 G's. Goldbug.com.
Hi, this is Bud Hopkins, and you're listening to the Paracast with Gene Steinberg, David Gedney, and I completely, enthusiastically endorse this program. It's an absolutely great program with an opportunity to stretch out and talk.
We have Christopher O'Brien. He's author of a new book called Stalking the Tricksters, subtitled Shapeshifters, Skinwalkers, Dark Adepts, and 2012. Now, from listening to you, the trickster sounds like somebody I'd like to meet because you're helping us, not harming us. So where does the disconnect come into play here?
Well, you have, for thousands of years, humanity existed in a very pastoral matriarchy. You didn't have urban centers and kings riding herd over urban centers like you see with the rise of the Mesopotamian and Harappan cultures. So prior to the rise of urban culture, the matriarchy, I think, was kinder and gentler when it comes to tricksters. It's with the introduction of monotheism, with the rise of urban cultures and the rise of the king states. That's when you have the first real sign of the trickster being marginalized, I think, in the eyes of various cultures. And I think that's when, especially with the rise of monotheism, that's where the trickster was then marginalized and then painted in a very negative way. Like, for instance, the serpent in the Garden of Eden would be a classic example of one of the earliest trickster forms in the Judeo-Christian tradition. The serpent tricked Eve into eating the from the tree and gaining some form of illumination or enlightenment as a result. And of course, the banishment from the Garden of Eden would be the monotheistic sort of lesson that is imparted that paints the trickster in a negative way. And you find this, I think, in all cultures. Tricksters, I think, as soon as you see a patriarchy rise and especially monotheism, become established, then the trickster gets painted in a negative light. The trickster, by its very definition and its most basic sense, is a amoral force. It's neither good nor bad. It's neither black or white or positive or negative. It's a liminal force that is like in standing in the threshold between two rooms, and it doesn't really have an agenda that's positive or negative. It doesn't act in a way that seems to have any foresight. In other words, it's like your 3-year-old nephew who's playing in the living room and then takes a bat and smacks his little sister on the head and doesn't understand why everybody gets upset and starts yelling at him, because he doesn't realize that doing that is a bad thing. The trickster has been painted in a negative way, I think, again, with the rise of monotheism and the patriarchy, I think, really was the first point in which the trickster became marginalized. Prior to that, the trickster was very amoral, neither good nor bad, positive or negative, black or white, male or female. It was just a force for change. The trickster's main job, I think, if you want to equate the trickster with a job, but the trickster's main agenda, if you will, is to introduce change and novelty into static systems, to topple and overthrow structure in a positive way, in that it introduces change into a static system that allows us to progress and move forward.
Give us an early example of that, where it's a beneficial effect, if you would.
Prometheus would be, I think, an example that most people are aware of. Of course, Prometheus was a Greek god who stole fire from Zeus, from Olympus, and secretly brought it to humanity. He was told by Zeus not to do this, but he did anyway, and he was punished by Zeus for supplying fire to humanity. He was chained to a rock, I think, in the Caucasus Mountains, and Zeus sent his eagle every day to pick out his liver, and then at night the liver would heal, and then for eternity that eagle comes back every day and picks out his liver as punishment for helping out humanity by bringing fire. So this would be, I think, an example of the tragic hero type trickster. Loki is another one who was constantly at odds with Odin and the other Scandinavian god forms. So you do have this altruistic kind of sense of the trickster, and I don't really think that this is particularly a positive or negative thing. I think the results of these tricksterish antics, if you will, have a positive effect in that they bring change and they bring novelty into for the benefit of humanity, which tends to topple a particular static structure, and we can move forward in our development. And I think ultimately it's a positive thing.
Okay, is it nature coming back to us and saying, you know what, you need to change? Is it an external force? Is it something internal? What is the sourcing of this trickster?
Well, I think the trickster energy is it's a constellation of things. It tends to manifest when it's needed, and then as people identify with that need and with the process that is undergoing, then it strengthens itself and it becomes more concrete, and that force then becomes a constellation of other forces. So it's like tendrils of energy that are coalescing together as a constellation that then create change and introduce novelty that topples structure and then pulls us forward in our development and moves us along in our path as a culture.
But Chris, I mean, so to play devil's advocate here for a moment, you're referring to Greek mythology that Prometheus introduces fires to human. He steals fires from Zeus and gives it to humans. Meanwhile, the pragmatist, the scientist in me says, well, at some point there was a proto-human that figured out that there was this thing called fire and they could use it. Where do you differentiate actual events and actual occurrences and discoveries of things versus what my grandfather, for lack of a better term, may hope rest in peace, he would have called Bubamaisis, fairy tales? I mean, where's the delineation there?
Well, I think the delineation it's pretty simple, actually. The very belief in a concept or in a figure or in a process has tremendous power. And because we're attempting to put a face on an energy or force, as we're doing by creating myths and legends and gods and goddesses and fairy tales, if you will, or Bubameister.
Bubameister.
You know, the very process of doing that has tremendous power. And the more people believe in something, the more real it becomes. So even though these are fairy tales, legends, and stories, they have tremendous power. And each culture around the world, and each subculture, has their own particular version that attempts to explain through fairy tales, myths, and legends these developments in human society and the human condition.
All right, but again, and I'm not trying to be argumentative here. I'm just trying to apply some rational thought to this. Where if you have human beings who are confronted with the process of trying to survive, and in order to do this, they have to control nature, and they come up with novel methods for doing so that very often involve a human being simply being creative. One could say, well, the spark for that inspiration, for that creativity is delivered from some external source. And one could say a lot of things, but meanwhile, humans somehow are able to, conquer the elements, do things that, at some point to a later culture seem like magic. But where do you, when you say that, beliefs have tremendous powers? Yeah, they a bunch of people who believe in something can make something happen. A bunch of people who believe that they should build a magnificent church at a time when there's technology that's really crude. Somehow they figure out a way. And presumably, and I'm saying presumably, I'm qualifying this because I don't know the answer, but presumably by the virtue of human-based engineering, they figure out an engineering solution to create this thing. This belief makes something that's an amazing thing. And really, at the end of it, what you have is the incredible force of human will. It sounds to me like what you're sort of saying is that you're finding an external source of inspiration, an external source of power for that awesome human will. So I guess the objective pragmatist to me says, at what point do you, ascribe a certain amount of power to belief and a certain amount of power to just the force of human will?
Well, that's, again, David, that's a really good question. And that's one of the things that I really initially, I felt I was wrestling with. Because like you, I do tend to look at things as scientifically as possible and rationally as possible. Yet I'm, in all this research that I've done, I've discovered that there seems to be some sort of force or energy that humans kind of ascribe particular qualities to that have a tendency to explain developments in a culture. And these developments tend to be positive, I think, in the long run. So, in prehistory, before writing, it was impossible to write the story of Mog, who happened to see lightning strike a tree and start a fire, and he was able to, capture some of that fire and carry it around. One of my favorite films of all time is the film Quest for Fire. I think that is a really good illustration of probably what happened back in the paleo days and when cavemen were running around naked and cold trying to figure out how to stay warm. So basically, I think legends and myths, in the oral tradition in indigenous cultures, is an attempt by the culture or subculture to explain how we got to where we're at. And I think that there's symbols and there's personifications of energy in these oral traditions that are a constellation. And in the case of the trickster, I think that you're looking at abstract properties that can manifest on several levels within individuals, situations, groups, and entire culture. Mm-hmm. And these properties, they're not necessarily related by cause and effect. I think that that it's an amalgamation of things. And as more of these properties come together, you have a more solidified and a more tangible, progression in the process.
Now, you said a key thing, though, that we see now all the time, certainly in trying to understand the modern mythology of, for example, UFOs, which is that you have this component of oral tradition. And if there's one thing I can say we probably wouldn't disagree on in a strong way, it's that certainly look at the oral traditions surrounding the UFO enigma, right? It's like the telephone game gone crazy.
Yeah.
You know, you get a core story starts and there's a core truth to it. You get 60 years of people who are all adding stuff to it, who are all bringing in their own agenda items, their own motivations, their own prejudices, their own ignorances. And at a certain point, what starts as one story, where there's a core of truth, there's a real core of truth to it, ends up as something that's so wildly convoluted, you know, to try to assign it even this idea of being mythology. Well, gee, it's so far removed from any reality. And like I think of Roswell is probably such a great example of that.
Classic example, and a great trickster event.
I'll tell you what, you just raised something that came up on an earlier show when you mentioned this. Hey neighbors, the old way to meet for business is over the phone or in person. The new, better way is to meet clients and colleagues online with GoToMeeting. GoToMeeting is like meeting in person, but less time-consuming and less expensive. Start your meeting with just a click. Everyone can see your computer desktop on their computer screen, so they can follow along as you move from page to page. You can use GoToMeeting to host a sales presentation, a product demo, or a training session. Even collaborate on documents by sharing your screens. Our listeners can try GoToMeeting free for 30 days. That's a month of unlimited online meetings free. For this special offer, you must visit www.gotomeeting.com/podcasts. That's gotomeeting.com/podcasts for a free trial.
Hi, this is Michelle from Namecheap. We don't have millions of dollars to get race car drivers or models to endorse us, but we will do everything we can to make those who buy domains or web hosting from us as happy as possible. We offer a free SSL as well as free WhoisGuard for a year to protect your identity from spammers or troublemakers. We won't bug you with obnoxious upsells when you check out or in your inbox. But most importantly, our customer service team really cares about you. It's what we pride ourselves in the most because it's your endorsement that means the most to us. If you like what you hear, get deals on both our domains and our web hosting at radio.namecheap.com, radio.namecheap.com, and be sure to play our contest by following us on Twitter.
Thanks, Michelle. And by the way, listeners, please use the coupon code Radio Day. That's Radio Day, one word, for special discounts at Namecheap.
You're in the Paracast with Gene Steinberg and David Biedney. You never know what's going to happen next.
We have Christopher O'Brien, and he's author of Stalking the Tricksters, a book that tries to put the entire trickster phenomenon into perspective. Okay, now, when we had you on a few weeks ago, you mentioned that Roswell was a classic case of trickster involvement. How so?
Well, we're jumping ahead quite a bit here, but I think it started actually about 9 years before with the War of the Worlds broadcast. I think that was the precursor, I think, to Roswell. And I do point that out in my book. I think Wells, tongue-in-cheek, sort of innocent, sort of shrugging his shoulders, saying, well, I didn't know the whole world was going to freak out when we did this broadcast. He knew darn well what was going to happen. And he did it for a very specific reason, to show that you can't believe everything that you hear on the radio and today see on the TV. And I think Roswell, and James Carrion brought this up, I think, in his interview last week, that the Roswell incident has a lot of very peculiar elements involved, in that we've seen some of the key players in promulgating the myth, Bill Moore, and subsequently what he fessed up to being a disinformation agent. And there's certain, I think, little kernels of tricksterism in the historical record that we know. I mean, in terms of the key players, out of the 300 witnesses, only 5 actually mention anything that could be construed as being otherworldly or ET based, for instance. I think Roswell, my personal opinion is when people investigate Roswell, they should look at what was going on down at White Sands just down the road and what Werner von Braun was up to. That's my personal view on it. But I think Roswell is a classic example of a modern myth. And if you follow the progression of thinking and you follow the progression of the books and how more and more witnesses have come forward and more layers of details have been added to the initial story, I think that this is, in Valet, of course, I think pointed this out, and others have pointed it out, that we are seeing the birth of a modern myth. And I think at its very core, there is a tricksterish element involved in this. And I think basically what it has done, it has shattered the conventional view that we're alone in this universe and that there are other beings out there, and that in this particular instance, we were able to bring down a craft, and you have that tantalizing sort of gestalt that the culture is making, that, hey, there are aliens out there, they're coming to visit us, and then boom, you're seeing this meme in the culture gain strength and gain validity in many people's minds. And I think the very core of it, though, the very basic element that's involved at the very initial event in July 1947, the trickster, I think, is involved there. And it's a force. It's not a person. It's not, it's a constellation of elements that coalesce together and become a very, I think, important, form of anti-structure, and creates novelty and change, which has happened.
But here's the thing, again, not to play devil's advocate, Chris.
Well, chicken or the egg?
Well, novelty, change is a constant throughout the universe. One thing we know in this universe is that nothing is really static. All systems are eroding and de-evolving. Everything is changing. So when you say that the trickster is responsible for change, to me, that's not a very good logical argument, because change is something that's happening anyway. So is the trickster part of a mechanism? Because, again, when you brought up the trickster in the context of Roswell, it sounded to me there like one could probably easily substitute the term trickster for deception. I mean,
yeah.
Sort of well. But you're throwing a lot of things into that trickster stew, and I can't figure out what the taste is. You've got change, which we know is part of the universe.
You got a point there. It's pretty spicy.
Well, it's not that it's spicy. It's just that it's almost so amorphous as to the point where I'd say, well, you can throw anything in there, and in that sense, it kind of becomes like religious belief, in that there is no rational structure. There's no logical structure to it. There's not even deductive reasoning. In fact, I'll really go off on a limb here. There's no structure at all. It's a big brown bag, and it's like, okay, anything that falls outside of human deductive reasoning and objective logic, you can dump it over in this bag and call it the trickster, and it sort of sounds to me like it's the God bag. Well, we don't know why this is happening. We don't know what the point is. You can't see God's purpose. God works in mysterious ways. Put it in the God bag, and it'll do what it'll do. And God will hopefully, God willing, move us in the direction of change, maybe positive change, maybe negative change. We can't really tell what the nature of the change is, because who the hell knows what God's plan is. So, again, I don't know that I'm yet personally clear on this idea of what the trickster is part of. Is it a natural mechanism? Is the trickster simply the part of nature that is the why that we don't understand, and you're giving it that name? Because other people would give that thing other names. Other people would call that Gaia. Other people would call that, God. Other people would call that the universe. In one way, it sounds like a terminology. And then in the book, when you position the role of the trickster element in Native American culture, well, there it sounds like the trickster is just basically their golem. The trickster is their Dybbuk. It's all of the bad stuff that happens to them. It's their boogeyman. Or am I missing something there?
Yeah, you're missing something there. Again, it's amoral. It's neither positive or negative, and the results of a trickster force manifesting within a culture generally tends to have a positive outcome. I'm kind of bummed you brought up the God thing, David. Now I can't start my trickster church. I'm bummed, man.
Trickster church.
You let the cat out of the
man. So what, you had a non-profit thing getting ready there?
I'm going to be filing my 501c. It's a Church of the Trickster, and I'm going to be the high priest. Okay, and I'm going to have you be my doorman.
No, I'll be your Antichrist. No, I'll be your Antichrist. And by the way, there is already a Church of Tricksterism. It's called the Church of the Subgenius. We're 2 steps ahead of you. Sorry.
There you go. Okay, yeah. Hail Bob.
Absolutely. We were there years ago.
Yeah.
So, and that's Hail Bob, not Microsoft Bob, okay?
Yeah. No, that's
Hail
Bob Dobbs Bob. Bob Dobbs Bob.
Yeah.
No, but
again, you're right, David. It is. I think you can make the argument that this is just an amorphous bag that you can throw a bunch of stuff you don't understand in. Use a convenient term and then use it as a catch-all and as some sort of blanket explanation to explain the things that we don't understand. But you're missing one really crucial point here.
Hit me, baby.
Okay, I'll hit you with a baby. I think one analogy that I've come up with, well, actually a couple of analogies that I've come up with are possibly will give you some insight. The trickster is actually the energetic process that takes us from one state to another state, whether it's a state of belief, whether it's a state of understanding, whether it's a state of, any sort of state that changes from one thing to another. In one analogy that I make is the trickster is that force that switches the 0 to a 1 in a binary system, a binary code. It's the electrical, if you will, or it's that spark that changes and transforms one thing into its new state or into its new development of its state. So it's actually that spark that you find in a process. And if you look at it from that point of view, then it becomes less of an amorphous sort of godlike thing, and it's more of a natural process. I think the trickster manifests when it needs to manifest, not when it wants to. So within a culture, if there is a need for anti-structure, if there's a need for change, the trickster then tends to coalesce together as a constellation and then manifest some sort of spark that takes us from one state to another state. I know a lot of people are going to be sitting out there scratching their heads listening to this conversation. This is really dense material, and to be honest with you, I about halfway through writing this book, I was getting headaches from thinking about this stuff. I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy territory, to swim in, and it's an amorphous kind of blob that's very difficult. It's like my first chapter 0, if you will, is trapping mercury. It's like breaking a thermometer and trying to corral the mercury that was inside. It's really difficult territory. That's not to say that it's impossible, but you really have to you really have to focus on, I think, cultural processes, how change manifests within culture, why it manifests within culture, what happens once it manifests, especially what happens to the status quo, to the ruling part of a structure in culture. And the trickster is what is constantly keeping us moving forward. It's not a god. It's not a goddess. It's older than that. It's more primal than that. It's a process. It's an energy. It's a spark.
So I understand what you're saying, but you see, the thing is, again, I have my own personal reasons for perhaps even believing some of what you're putting forward based on experiences I've had, some of which I've alluded to on the Paracast. So I'm not discounting this, but the problem here is that from a logical point of view, just from Logic 101, when you're describing this trickster energy, first of all, I'm at a point now, having a grasp of physics, that when I hear the term energy thrown around, I have to say it gets me a little nervous. When people say energy, I say, well, okay, what unit of measurement of energy are we talking about? What manifestation of energy are we talking about? What wavelength of energy are we, energy is a process of transformation. Something's getting transformed to something else. It doesn't just show up in a vacuum and then disappear in a vacuum. At least not our understanding of it. That's not to say it's not possible, but our
it can't be either created or destroyed, only changed in its form.
Right. So with all of this, when we talk about things that move things forward and this idea of novelty, again, I mean, you look at the history of technology. Things don't happen in a vacuum. We look at the timeline of the development of technologies. It's like you're talking about the spark in a circuit. Well, that electrical spark doesn't just show up there randomly. Okay? A circuit is a very closely designed thing, very carefully designed thing that sends currents to certain gates, to certain memory positions, to certain components in an integrated circuit when they are needed. They are sequenced. They are timed. There is a master timing bus that lines up these events in time so that they happen in a sequence where there is a process that is being built towards, and that process is playing out in really a very linear fashion. I mean, in a computer, very little happens randomly. Most of it is happening along a very carefully tracked plan.
Hey listeners, did you know that Fate is the oldest and best-known publication on the paranormal? Well, since 1948, Fate has provided their readers with fascinating, in-depth articles on subjects like psychics and spiritualists, ghosts and hauntings, UFOs and aliens, as well as readers' true personal mystical experiences. For under $20, you can keep up with all the latest information. To subscribe, call now at 1-800-728-2730 or visit Fate's website at www.fatemag.com. That's 1-800-728-2730 or www.fatemag.com. So what are you waiting for? Your fate awaits.
You're in the Paracast with Gene Steinberg and David Biedney. You never know what's going to happen next.
I have a track plan, by the way, a very carefully tracked plan to tell everybody that we have Christopher O'Brien, the author of Stalking the Tricksters, and now we're looking into things that work by plan. But I wanted to interrupt you for another reason, David. When you raise the possibility that things work according to a plan. So is there a plan afoot in our understanding of UFOs and paranormal phenomena in general?
Well, again, I think that this is a layered process. I think that we're seeing something that has been operating for millennia. It's slowly layering into various cultures and subcultures on the planet. I don't see this. Individual ufological events, I don't think, are what's important. I think it's the overall effect. Valet brought up a good analogy of the cultural thermostat. Mm-hmm. That when things heat up, it tends to cool things down, and when things tend to get cold, it heats up. I think that you can equate, if you take his thermostat analogy, you could equate maybe warm with negative and cold with positive, or vice versa. And you can also even overlay a tricksterish quality to that thermostatic process, if you will. So, again, I think UFOs are the most recent manifestation, possibly, of trickster force, if energy kind of makes you uncomfortable. So it's very difficult, I think, to really look at a particular phenomenon like UFOs and really glean anything from individual events. I think it's the overall effect of interaction with these things we see in the sky, and we've been seeing them for probably thousands of years. So this is, I think, an ongoing thing. I think as we progress as a culture, I think as we progress as aware, rational, scientifically based beings, that the manifestation becomes more technological. And this is all almost ufology 101 stuff here. But if you equate the underlying spark or underlying causality to some sort of tricksterish type manifestation, then at least in my mind it becomes clearer. And if you look at the commonalities between all your trickster forms as they exist in the oral traditions and myths and legends and what was that word? Bubamyces. Bubamyces around the world. You'll notice that there's one thing, and this is when I had a major, I think, breakthrough in my thinking in researching this book. I tried to look for a correlation, something that is consistent throughout a majority, if not all, of your trickster forms, and that is shape-shifting. That is what really, I think, gave me one of my major breakthroughs in researching this material. The very fact that trickster forms are able to shape-shift in one manner or another is, I think, very important. And that's why I was able to then open up the definition, I think, of tricksters into the realm of elementals, of blood-based vampiric-type legends, of werewolves, and other types of forms that are, one of the commonalities is that quality of shape-shifting. So, again, David, you bring up really good points. I don't think that my theory is totally fleshed out. I don't think that there's tons of gaping holes in it. My whole inspiration or motivation to even attempt to tackle this material is because I'm sick and tired of people of being locked with blinders on, like you mentioned at the onset, but you go out to investigate a UFO sighting and you find out Bigfoot, appeared down the road, or perhaps there were strange weather phenomena that were occurring at the time, or aberrant social events were taking place. I have always sensed an underlying interconnectedness between these very divergent things. And my attempt here with this trickster material is to come up with a underlying interconnectedness or some sort of structure that could possibly be tying these various divergent things together. And I don't think enough creative thinking is taking place in the field. I think we're very stagnant right now. I don't see any real progression in our creative thinking. There's not enough out of the box thinking going on. I was so saddened when Mac Tones passed. I think Mac had tremendous potential. Was a very brilliant, very bright guy. And I've always been a John Keel, Jacques Vallée aficionado, and what I am attempting to do is try to take the ball that they brought down the field and try to take it maybe another few yards down the field. And the only way to really do that, I think, is to start at the basic fundamental, at the very beginning of this whole reality-based line of thinking. And the trickster form, I think, is the only one that I've been able to look at and really scratch my head and think about that even remotely can make sense. And again, I do understand that there's a lot of holes in my theory. I'll be the first to admit that. But hey, it's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. Bring that ball down the field a little bit.
Well, we're trying to hone down, like what the theory is. I mean, in the book, you jump around between a number of different things. Like you go into a very interesting historical perspective, for example, on the origins of vampiric activity. Which the vampire thing is really fascinating in that our culture, for some reason, can never get enough of it. It's always somehow compelling, and right now we're in the middle of yet another huge renaissance of interest in this. And I mean, I'm not an anthropologist. I mean, I don't understand necessarily why, but you do, of course, point out in the book that blood sacrifice and the blood ritual has always been there. It's funny because recently I was also just happened to throw on that movie, The Devil's Advocate, with Keanu Reeves and Al Pacino, where Pacino's like the devil and he's this lawyer and he's Keanu Reeves is his son and he's the Antichrist, blah, blah, blah. But in that movie, there's this whole thing about how blood ritual is something that it always seems to be underneath of almost every aspect of our culture, whether it's on the fringes of our culture like Santeria and voodoo, or whether it's institutionalized and it's kind of sanitized, like the whole thing they do in church of drinking the dead Jewish carpenter guy's blood, which has kind of a very creepy set of connotations to it. I mean, and
people slaughtering 1 million Iraqis. I mean, that's a ritual blood sacrifice. And
I wouldn't disagree with that at all, sir.
It's a point well taken. I think that this is a blind spot in Western culture. I think you bring up Santeria and Candomblé and other blood-based ritual forms of belief, the transmogrification of blood into wine, and you find this underlying theme all around the world. But it's something that most people don't really want to think about. They don't really want to go there. And one thing that I think say with some confidence is that blood is a powerful magical elixir. And I know in a rational scientific conversation, I would just be laughed at and scoffed at. But I think if you look at blood as a ritual substance, as it's been utilized down through the ages, you'll find that it's very powerful, and it's something that most people don't want to, they don't even want to go there. They don't want to think about it. And
but what's the paranormal foundation of that? I mean, yeah, blood is very mystical, sure, because it's the thing that's inside of all of us that keeps us going. That we at a subconscious level, we all know it. There's the idea your heart stops pumping that blood, and it's over. So. It of course it has that mystical role in our lives. It's, cut through. It's what's under the very surface of yourself. But how do you take that? I guess my question is, how do you take that reality, that physiological, biological reality that is absolutely in your face? How do you then transpose that into having any kind of a mystical meaning? I guess that's the part of the mechanism that I'm not clear about, personally.
And I'm personally not clear about it either, to be honest with you. I recognize the cultural significance, I think, in terms of belief systems that have arisen around the very concept of blood as some form of powerful elixir. One of the things that I've found myself on, being the odd man out in the cattle mutilation phenomenon, for instance. I've done quite a bit of field work and research and investigation into that particular mystery. And one of the things that I am absolutely pretty much convinced of is at the core of the cattle mutilation phenomenon, as an example, you have some element of ritual blood sacrifice going on. And I do tie this modern sort of manifestation of a mystery into the ancient human practice of animal sacrifice. I mean, look at the rise of the Judeo-Christian tradition. It all comes from Abraham. And what's the most famous story of Abraham? Of him being asked by the Creator to sacrifice his only son on an altar. It's. I think if you look at it from a logical, rational, scientific point of view, you're not going to be able to answer that question. There's got to be some sort of disconnect there. And that disconnect ties us into an ancient belief that blood is somehow a crucial, important magical elixir. And again, this is all, it sounds great on paper and all that. And like I said, there's tons of holes in my theory, but I do have a sense that I'm onto something here. By blasting open the definition of the trickster, by looking at the correlation of shapeshifting as a interconnectedness between potential trickster forms, then you start to get possibly on the right track, at least in my line of thinking here.
Now, this is something where maybe we want to start exploring the meaning behind each element of the subtitle. And we went into Shapeshifters, and we're wrapping up with part one. We have a whole hour of part two to get into the various efforts to stalk the tricksters. So Shapeshifters, something that looks like one thing and then becomes something else. And that's almost like the werewolf. If we're getting into the vampire lore, of course, werewolves always surrounded vampires. So Shapeshifters, people turning into dogs, cats, werewolves, what?
Exactly. All down through history in most cultures on the planet, you have forms that are legendary, that have been mythologized, if you will, that feature that ability to change from, let's say, a human form into an animal form, which would be, for instance, the Skinwalker tradition in the Dene, Navajo and Apache belief system of these dark adepts that are able to shapeshift into various animal forms. You have this quality in South America and Africa. This is something that is worldwide in terms of the mythological and legendary realm. Obviously, if you put your logical, scientific, rational hat on, this stuff is all like, oh yeah, right, sure, yes, a human can shapeshift into an animal form. On the surface, it doesn't make any sense. But then, why do we have such a consistent, albeit varying view of this, but we do have what appears, at least to me, to be a consistent sort of belief that has existed within humanity that does ascribe this ability to certain powerful adepts. Hence the subtitle of the book. I would rather have not used a subtitle for this book because it does kind of pigeonhole the subject matter in the eye of the casual Barnes & Noble browser. But I do feel that the belief in the Skinwalker tradition, I think it's indicative of a tricksterish type manifestation. And I think that the Sherman Ranch case that David mentioned earlier is a classic example of tricksterism manifesting in the realm of the scientific paradigm. Some of the events that happened on that ranch just totally baffled Colm Kelleher and Jacques Vallée and Eric Davis and the guys that were involved in monitoring that space up there. I think that particular case, I think, is a pivotal key case in the annals of paranormal investigation, because not only do you have a crack world-class scientific team that's examining what appears to be a very paranormal hotspot, but you have manifestation of tricksterish energy that's like trying to trap Mercury. They were never able to really come, at least to our knowledge publicly, they have never admitted that they were able to make any headway with trying to determine the causality behind these events. So, again, the shape-shifting element, I think, is something that is correlated through this whole subject, and I do feel that by coming up with that breakthrough, at least in my own personal thinking on it, it did open up the door for me to really riff with it and go with it.
You know what? We'll open more doors and try to find the tricksters, get a handle on them, see if we can ever get more than just stalking involved, and maybe we can get one. In our own room, we'll sit here and we'll talk to a trickster. Instead, we have David, instead of talking to regular tricksters.
Hey, what are you talking about?
We have more of whatever this is. Ladies and gentlemen, pipe down, sir. Okay?
I'm not piping down. I can't do that.
We'll have more of whatever this is in part 2 on the other side of the Paracast.
Are you really hearing me? Is this a random collection of pixels and bits made to sound like a tricksterish form? What is this? What is the difference between perception and reality? Oh, look, it's a hit of DMT. Now I will really change the meaning of the discussion.
So, Frank, what do you think about UFOs?
I saw one once. I think they're out there. What they are, I don't know. Well, I believe that something is out there. I think that those things that you see in the sky are only one small manifestation of a whole wide range of phenomena that people haven't properly named or have attributed the wrong source to.
Welcome back to the Paracast with Gene Steinberg and David Biedny.
Our trickster left for the day, and so we brought back, instead of having that trickster, we have the David Biedny trickster.
I'm not feeling too trickster-esque right now, but okay.
All right, we'll go for that. Seriously, we have Christopher O'Brien, author of Stalking the Tricksters, Shapeshifters, Skinwalkers, Dark Adepts in 2012. We got into Shapeshifters. We are covering Skinwalkers, and when we're looking at definitions, we have the Shapeshifter and we have the Skinwalker. How do we clearly define them?
Well, there's no real, I think, way to define both with one quick, easy definition.
Oh, I can. I can. Okay. Shapeshifters are a subset of Skinwalkers. Thank you. I'll be here all week.
Well, actually, Skinwalkers are a subset of Shapeshifters. Again,
stop. You're both right.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it works both ways. A great truth is one whose opposite is also true. So I guess we're on the right track there. Skinwalkers is just a catch-all term, I think, that denotes a particular talented Dene sorcerer, or black magician, if you will. And there is a belief on the reservation. I'm up on the Navajo reservation regularly, and also make trips up to Hopi and to Zuni and in other places as well here in the Southwest. And I'll tell you, the people there, they take this stuff a lot more seriously than you would think in this, in the 21st century. It's very difficult to do any sort of research on the res when it comes to witchcraft, and especially the darkest of the black magicians, which would be the shapeshifter called a skinwalker. And a lot of people, you just even mention the word Yishadolshi, which is the Navajo way to say it, and they literally turn on their heel and they'll walk the other way. Very, very few Navajo or Dene people that I've been able to really enter into a meaningful conversation about the topic. And there's a belief system around skinwalkers, as I point out in the book, that it's a very difficult nut to crack in terms of being a researcher. And I have talked to law enforcement officials that have responded to skinwalker claims, reports and encounters, and there's just a palpable sense of fear that's evoked by just mentioning the very term. So, again, this harkens back to what I was saying earlier about the power of belief. The very fact that people on the res, and thousands of people, have a belief system around the reality of these dark adepts, if you will, I think is very powerful, and it has a real impact on the individuals who have this belief. So, again, you're going to find similar types of traditions and beliefs all around the world. I mean, there's been news stories of people that have been seen in Africa that are able to shapeshift into various animal forms. There was one news story that came out just before my book was published about some guys that were leading this goat, and the goat was escaped, and somebody shot it, and then the thing turned into a human when it died. And obviously you have to take these types of so-called news reports with a grain of salt, but the very fact that there's a belief system around this potential ability, I think, is very powerful. And shapeshifting is, again, to kind of reiterate, shapeshifting is a correlated quality that I find is consistent through most, if not all, trickster forms.
Now, this is one of these things where, I don't want to seem like I'm coming down on you hard, Chris, because people who have listened very astutely to the show know that one of my very uncomfortable paranormal things I don't talk about is that, and I don't pretend to understand this, so I'll just, say the sentence with some degree of hesitation, but in my life I have had direct one-on-one interactions with what appeared to be some sort of a shape-shifting entity. And this was a series of contacts that happened over a couple of years. And I don't even like talking about it. It's not something that, it's one of those things that, it's, bring it up on the show, and there's that element of people listen to the show who would love to see me get, brought down, who will very quickly jump and say, he's got no proof, he's mentioning this, oh my God, how can he say this? He has no proof, and it's right. I have no physical proof of it. I have the very sickening feeling that's quickly gathering in my stomach right now as I even remember interacting with whatever this was. There's some very weird things associated with this, and it was a female. And through a period of a couple of years, I interacted with this thing more than a few times, and each time it was the same. I knew it was the same being, except she sounded completely different. And I don't mean like makeup. I mean like it was a different person, except it was the same person, except it wasn't. And I have no explanation for this. I can tell you this, the nature of the interactions was not positive. The nature of the memories of the interactions, what I would categorize as unpleasant. I'm only bringing it up now to acknowledge that I have some belief in this based on my own experiences. I don't have any understanding of it. I wish I had never interacted with this thing because, like I said, even talking about it now, my stomach's hurting me a little bit. But what I will say is this, and I'll sort of, put this in the context of what you write about in terms of the Skinwalker. with regards to Native Americans' interactions with these beings. These interactions, my interactions with whatever this was, and what appear to be the vast majority of interactions of Native Americans with these beings, is one of negativity. If you're a Native American, based on what I read in your book, Chris, you don't want to meet one of these things out in the night.
Oh, no.
You don't want to interact with them. Based on what I can say, whatever this thing was I interacted with, I don't know what it was. I do not know. I do not know why it interacted with me. But no part of it was positive. No part of it was pleasant. And so, again, it makes me think, well, are these trickster elements? Because they certainly didn't engender any kind of positive change in me. They didn't move me towards any kind of enlightenment. It just creeped the hell out of me. And it sounds like with, these Indian interactions you're talking about, if these skinwalkers are tricksters, it doesn't sound like they're doing anything positive.
Well, that's the point well taken. Remember we said, I mentioned that there are 3 classifications, at least in my, expanded definition of trickster, that there are 3 classifications. We've only covered the first 2. The first one, of course, is the most ancient primordial anthropomorphized animal, changing Gaia or nature for the betterment of humanity. The second type is a tragic hero who actually supplies humanity with technology. The third type is the shamanic trickster form, which is like a bridge, a liminal link between the primordial trickster forms and the modern trickster form. Now, I'll digress just a little bit here. Prior to the establishment of urban centers and a pantheistic system of gods and goddesses, your personal link to the divine or to creator was generally through some shamanic entity in your subculture. The shaman tradition, as it exists even today, is basically a doorway and a system of belief and a system of knowledge that allows you direct access with the divine, or your connection with Creator. Now, of course, with the rise of the urban centers and a pantheistic system of gods and goddesses, you had the rise of the priest class, which supplanted and pretty much shunted aside the shamanic traditions, and you have a priest class which becomes a doorway to the divine, a colonizer of spirit that allows you connection with Creator, that says you're worthy enough to be connected with some sort of divine energy or force. I think that as the shaman system was shunted aside in urban cultures, again, the trickster became marginalized. Now today, if you go to Native American cultures, for instance, you'll find that one of the most important medicine societies on Indian reservations is the Trickster or Clown Society. Now, tricksters and clowns, there's a very important connection there. This is where I think modern people have their closest relationship with trickster, I think, is with clowns. And clowns can be kind of freaky to some people, and I think there's even a particular phobia that I forget what it's called, but fear of clowns. Clowns, I think, are the most prevalent form of tricksters out there right now. And what we're looking at is a human trickster form that, instead of being symbiotic like the anthropomorphized animal or the tragic hero, instead of having that symbiotic quality where it's something that is generally positive, you have more of a parasitic sense about you. Bernie Madoff would be a classic example of a human trickster. I mean, the guy was able to freaking get $60 billion out of people.
Yeah, but wait a minute. So, okay, isn't that just an example of a really slick thief? I mean,
Exactly.
Well, but
Uri Geller, Daniel Douglas Home, Houdini, all sorts of people.
Hold on.
Sisters.
All right, now hold on, stop. Because now we're definitely jumping all over the map. And there was a little bit of discourse about this on the forums where I put down a message in there saying very, very simply that, there are people who definitely exhibit some anomalous abilities. It's one of the reasons we do the Paracast. I'll concede to the possibility that early on in Uri Geller's life that he may have manifested some unusual abilities. I'll acquiesce to that. But, you had on one of these threads, you had, positioned Uri Geller as this, potential human focus point or portal of some sort. And I got to say, I'm with Skylar on that one. At this point, regardless of if, again, it might have been
if you read it carefully,
Excuse me, guys, not everybody reads the Paracast forums, and maybe we should kind of explain what we're talking about here.
Hi, this is Michelle from Namecheap. We don't have millions of dollars to get race car drivers or models to endorse us, but we will do everything we can to make those who buy domains or web hosting from us as happy as possible. We offer a free SSL as well as free WhoisGuard for a year to protect your identity from spammers or troublemakers. We won't bug you with obnoxious upsells when you check out or in your inbox. But most importantly, our customer service team really cares about you. It's what we pride ourselves in the most because it's your endorsement that means the most to us. If you like what you hear, get deals on both our domains and our web hosting at radio.namecheap.com, radio.namecheap.com, and be sure to play our contest by following us on Twitter.
Thanks, Michelle. And by the way, listeners, please use the coupon code RADIODAY, that's Radio Day, one word, for special discounts at Namecheap.
This is James Carrion, International Director of the Mutual UFO Network. You are listening to the Paracast with Gene Steinberg and David Biedney.
I would say we have Christopher O'Brien. He is the author of Stalking the Tricksters, Shapeshifters, Skinwalkers, Dark Adepts in 2012, and maybe we don't want to get into 2012, or maybe we do, I don't know. But David, you were focusing on a thread in our forums featuring Skylar, one of our regular and very productive and very knowledgeable members. Maybe you can tell us what this is all about.
Well, no, it's just the whole idea of that at a certain point, and certainly, we try to do this on the Paracast, where you admit that there are people, there are enigmatic characters, and we want to. There's one of them I want to talk with you at length, Chris. And I told you before we did the show that one of the people I really want to focus on is this Hoon guy. And we'll get back to him in a little bit because it looks like there's something there that is potentially truly anomalous. But in the case of like a Geller, right, I think personally, like I said, I'm willing to accept the idea that at some point early on, Geller might have had some anomalous abilities. I think that with the subsequent amount of information that's come out about him, it becomes painfully clear that certainly in any kind of recent time, there is absolutely nothing that is believable about Geller in terms of leading me to be convinced that he has any sort of paranormal abilities. Chris Angel, someone who on camera does amazing stuff. I am absolutely fascinated. I'm bowled over by his visual illusions. But the guy is the first to admit that he has no paranormal abilities, that what he's doing are very carefully crafted illusions. They're sleight of hand tricks. So...
Yeah, and I agree. And one of the things that I pointed out in the beginning of the thread was that there are certain people that exhibit unnatural abilities. Bernie Madoff, I think, had an unnatural ability to milk people out of billions of dollars. That doesn't make him paranormal. I wasn't suggesting that Houdini and the Fox sisters and John Smith, who started the Mormon religion, I wasn't suggesting these people were paranormal. What I was suggesting is that they had unnatural abilities that the rest of us don't have, or more people would be able to start huge worldwide religions or float up in the air.
Or maybe it's the desire to do so. I mean, Madoff decided that he was going to play a game. He was going to build people, and Madoff actually did what the greatest shysters of all time have done, is that he built an aura of mystery around him, and my favorite part, he wore expensive clothes. He dressed well. Basically, look, how many times have we seen this in our society? Every frickin' politician up there with the coiffed hair and the really finely tailored suits, human beings have been indoctrinated into the idea that if someone is well dressed, that somehow they're more believable. Which, hey, the Nazis, their uniforms were masterpieces of fashion design. They really were. They had the best looking uniforms ever. Okay.
Yeah, you're absolutely arguing my point. My point being that there is a class of trickster that is not your primordial energy form. What they have.
Can't we call them shysters? Do we have to call them tricksters? See, terminology has meaning to me. Go ahead.
How about Adzam Rinpoche or some of the Rinpoches that just defy description in some of the abilities that they have? They're not shysters. They don't attempt to make money off of their abilities, or their apparent abilities, I think, to be more accurate.
Well, again, we got Bernie Madoff, who's a guy who has always been and will always be nothing but a thief and a scumbag.
Right.
Okay, he's off on one side. Then we have guys like Jose de Freitas Arrigo. Now,
yeah, exactly.
Right? So who never dressed well, didn't do any of that stuff, who had very interesting abilities that, if you want to make the case that there was a guy who had some sort of trickster power working through him, I'll buy that. That's one where I'll say, okay, to me, you can make a very interesting argument that that's indeed what's happened. And then in your book, you bring up a case that I'm admittedly not familiar with. I told you about this when we talked on the phone, and I'd like to spend a little while talking about it because it's one of these things where it was one of these cases where I started reading in your book about this, and I thought, I've never heard of this guy. This guy sounds like the real deal. Now, Skylar, if you're hearing this now and you know otherwise, I'm sure I'll be hearing from you after this airs, but tell us about Daniel Hume.
Well, Daniel Hume was a very enigmatic figure who was born in the 1830s in Scotland. From a very early age, apparently had some fairly interesting abilities. He was one of a number of personages during the great spiritualist movement, if you will, in the 1870s and 80s, who appeared to be able to manifest objects. He was whom in one very famous attended session was able to levitate out a window and I think a couple of floors up and go around the wall and come back in through another window. He was able to manifest instruments and play them remotely. He was actually William Crookes, who was a famous scientist at the time. I think it was a discoverer of some element, thallium, if I remember correctly. Did an extensive examination and investigation of Hume and his abilities, and signed off on him, saying that he could not ascertain, any sort of trickery involved. There have been some, James Randi, for instance, has come up with some potential explanations to explain how Hume was able to do certain things. One thing is, I think, pretty clear, though, that he was very enigmatic. He did seem to, if he was a trickster and a Chris Angel type, he was able to hide any sort of evidence of trickery. He never accepted money for readings that he did or seances that he conducted or any of the demonstrations of his apparent abilities, which I think, and David, I'm sure you'll agree with this. I've heard you agree before about this, that this is, I think, indicative of something that could be, I think some sort of proof, at least in my mind, of someone that doesn't have an ulterior motive. Arrigo is another one who didn't accept money. So, Hume, again, it's very difficult in hindsight, obviously, to look at a man and look at his apparent abilities in his life and cast judgment on the veracity of his abilities or the extent of his abilities. But when you have someone like Crook, who did spend quite a bit of time with Hume, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Hume did demonstrations for some of the glitterati and the royals of Europe in the 1860s and 70s, and there is some indication that there probably was some special abilities there. But again, he's just one of a number of people, I think, over the years that have exhibited what appears to the casual onlooker to be special abilities. Like Sai Baba was able supposedly to manifest objects, to pull mana from the air. Adzam Rinpoche, who's very enigmatic, is a Tibetan Buddhist monk who is able to leave footprints in stone, is able to manifest, mana out of the air, and this is on videotape. There's
really,
oh yeah. Yeah, he's quite an interesting character. There are some adepts, I think, in the East over the years that have purported to have these types of abilities. Now, in the thread that we were talking about earlier, I was just suggesting that there are individuals out there and have been throughout history that seem to have some sort of special destiny, that have an ability to make reality conform to their will. And I used loosely the term walking portal, which is probably a mistake on my part. I've been responding to jibes and being dogged for that particular moment of weakness on my part. But, again, I think that there are humans that seem to exhibit what could be likened to some sort of tricksterish ability. I think the tools, the manner and method of tricksterism can be used by humans in a parasitic way, self-serving way, or in a altruistic sort of symbiotic way. I do feel that there are shamanic systems on the planet that have certain adept knowledge that is utilized oftentimes to make a point in the subculture to impress upon the people that this person does have some special abilities. Terence McKenna brought up some very, very interesting points about the use of mind-altering substances by indigenous cultures that could possibly be some sort of triggering device. Let's say DMT, psilocybin mushrooms could trigger latent abilities in humans.
Now, see, I have to just stop you there because this is a topic I've gotten into a lot of private discussions with people on the forums. I've gotten a lot of emails about this. I don't know if Gene has as well. We've received a tremendous amount of email from people saying, when are we going to do a DMT episode? There have been other shows in this space where people who have never had any kind of hallucinogenic drug experience will go out, score some psilocybin mushroom, and then without telling anybody, without any proper preparation, go and drop shrooms and then come back with their absolutely ridiculous, childish impressions, and then essentially try to establish some kind of a tenuous connection between visual hallucinations and objective reality. Now, I think that is incredibly irresponsible, and I just want to go on the record and say that. And I'm someone who, in my lifetime, has actually had exposure to a number of these compounds. Not recently. It's been quite a while since I did any hallucinogens, but I did go through a period when I was younger where I thought this would be an interesting thing to try. And I did try a number of things. I never did DMT, but I tried just about every other type of, at the time in the mid-'70s, late '70s, early '80s.
That explains it, Gene.
Well, no. Well, just the point being that I did these things in controlled environments with some education about what I was doing before I did it. Always with a guide figure, someone who had experience with the substance or the compound, in order to provide guidance. And what I came away with from those experiences was the understanding that our perception of reality is highly malleable. That's what I learned. I did not come to believe that the things that I had seen or visualized under, for example, the effects of mescaline or LSD, I didn't come to think that that was somehow an objective reality, which I think a lot of these researchers looking into these very complex compounds, and McKenna's one that, and I know I get into trouble with this because I say about Terence McKenna's work, all right, he has some interesting thoughts about this stuff, but to then try to create a framework by where people like McKenna will say this altered reality is every bit a real reality as the reality that surrounds you when you're not under the influence of this highly powerful, highly potent form of hallucinogenic material. To sort of equate those things, I think, is a logical fallacy. I don't think it makes any sense logically. And also, it displays, I believe, a pretty high degree of ignorance about how the human perception system works and about how the brain works. You know, it's kind of like looking at a movie and saying that's a reality. And it's like, well, it's a reality in the framework of a two-dimensional collection of pixels that are just telling a story, but a movie is no more reality than a hallucinogenic vision is a reality. I'm sorry. I just have to say that for the record because,
I think it's
important.
A point well taken. And I think for the most part, I absolutely agree with you. I do also want to mention the caveat that we only perceive a very thin sliver of what could be scientifically called reality.
Absolutely correct. I no debate on that. I mean,
right.
Our perception, our sensory input devices are limited to a tiny little sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum. I've said that on the show many, many times. You know, there's stuff going on in the infrared realm around us we don't see. There's stuff going on many different realms around us that we don't see because our eyesight, our smell, even our instrumentation,
right,
doesn't allow us to peer.
How about if I give you an example of something and get your comments on this?
Sure.
Like you, I went through a phase of psychedelic experimentation many years ago. Actually, it was quite extensive, shall we say. I had one experience that I have yet to reconcile, and yet I still scratch my head when I think about it.
All right.
We were out in the woods. It was extremely dark. It was a moonless night with clouds. We were in an abandoned old mining camp with an abandoned miner's log cabin. There was a group of us inside in the dark, pitch black, and there was another group outside by a campfire. I did an experiment. I wrote with a lit cigarette in the air in script, "Can you read this?" And everybody sitting there, the 3 or 4 people that were sitting there with me, you know, they could read what I had written there because for some reason the compound seemed to allow the light as it was being written into words to hang in the air.
Yeah, their after images were enhanced.
Exactly. Okay, well, how do you explain this? 2 people who were outside that were not there when I wrote in the air, about 10 seconds later came in, stopped in their tracks, and said, "Yes, I can read it." How do you explain that?
I don't know.
There you go. So there's an example of what I would call some sort of perceptual heightening of awareness that is not explained with conventional, mechanistic view of human perception. It does not conform. And then we tried it on other people, and they were able to read it too. People that were not anywhere near or within eyesight of me writing with a lit cigarette in the pitch black, people were able to come in from the outside and read the words. And I did an ad hoc controlled experiment at the time. And this to this day, I still can't figure out how, what sort of mechanistic process allowed that to take place.
But you're not sure about the passage of time between when you actually wrote it and when they came in.
Sure, I am.
But you were under the influence.
The passage of time was, in the first instance, was about 20 to 30 seconds. We did it, and people were able to read it almost to a minute later. After about a minute, for some reason, it didn't work. But up until that point, people were able to come in and read the words that were written there.
You hear it on TV. You hear it on radio. Cash for gold. Yes, it's an enticing phrase during these challenging days, but the real question is how much cash are you going to get for your gold and silver? Are you going to get the best value? Well, you can get the best price from a company whose owners have decades of experience in the business. Welcome to Goldbug. The folks at Goldbug warn you that many of those high-budget gold buyers are paying far less than you deserve for your gold and silver. Goldbug will give you top dollar each and every time. To learn more, call 1-866-596-6134. That number again, 1-866-596-6134 for Goldbug. Or visit us online at goldbug.com. That's Goldbug with 2 G's. Goldbug.com.
You've entered another dimension. You've entered the Paracast.
We have Christopher O'Brien. This is not an anti-smoking commercial or a pro-smoking commercial. That is our disclaimer.
Yeah, don't try this at home.
Definitely not. Definitely not. This is done under controlled circumstances with physicians nearby. And, we don't want to tell you how many years he spent recovering from this ailment. Seriously, we don't have a lot of time to stalk those tricksters. But you have a couple of other topics in this subtitle of the book. One is a dark adept. So what's a dark adept?
Well, we've kind of been talking about dark adepts. I use the term dark, I think, loosely. We've been talking about adepts, I think, in general. Skinwalkers would be an example of a dark adept. A Voodoo priest would be a dark adept. There are certain types of shamanic traditions that can go either positive or negative. Anytime you have an individual, like, let's say, Hitler or someone that's able to mesmerize mass groups of people or even small groups of people to do things that they normally would not do, that to me is exhibiting the abilities of a dark adept.
Sarah Palin.
There you go. Yeah, Dick Cheney.
Glenn Beck, Bill O'Reilly, Sean Hannity.
Well, are those tricksters, or are those just people tapping into the collective ignorance of the American population? I mean, where do you draw the line?
A dark adept to me is someone that utilizes knowledge that most of us don't have for nefarious parasitic purposes. This, in my expanded definition, is a form of tricksterism. It is not pure tricksterism in terms of an amoral sort of neither positive or negative force that's done in a symbiotic or manifested in a symbiotic formula or way. But these are people that are using manners and methods and methodology and tools of tricksterism to get over, basically, and to become a parasitic force in the culture.
So we're talking about every banker?
Yeah.
You're talking about every day trader, every stockbroker,
it's where
financial writer. I mean, seriously.
It's in the eye of the beholder. If you're some Maori Indian on a small island off New Zealand and you don't have exposure to these things, they could be construed that way. Sure, it's everything is relative, and we have to look at the manifestation of the trickster force, or I hesitate to use the word energy, but you have to look at it. Everything is relative when it comes to this, and I think it's ultimately the end result. It's that shattering of structure. It's the manifestation in the culture of some sort of change that pulls us forward in our development. And I keep going back to that because that, I think, is really what the trickster force or the whole idea of the trickster as it manifests in our reality. I think that is the most important element in all of this. And we're looking right now, the other part of that subtitle is the 2012 conundrum that we're rapidly approaching. It tickles me and horrifies me at the same time when I hear people say the Mayan calendar is going to end and the world is going to end and we're all going to die. First of all, I think there's 22 Mayan calendars and none of them end. It's like saying our calendar ends. Our calendar doesn't end. The Maya have predicted out certain things out almost to the year 5000. This is when 3 of their calendars click over into a new cycle, kind of similar to your car flipping over its odometer, the old analog odometers, to zero after it gets to 100,000 miles. There have been earth change type events that have occurred in the past when these types of cycles have switched over. But you talk to Don Alejandro, some of the real Guatemalan Highland Maya, Quiche Maya timekeepers, and they laugh when they listen to this pop culture programming that you see on the History Channel even. It's ridiculous. I saw on the History Channel they stated that the Maya went extinct in the 1300s. The Maya are probably the largest group of indigenous Americans. There's like 3.5 or 4 million Maya. How can the History Channel, where do they get off saying that the Maya are extinct?
Well, that's the whole thing about history, I mean, how do you even believe history anymore if you want to have people run for president who believe the Earth is 6,000 years old?
Exactly. We're living in tricksterish times right now, and I think this whole idea of 2012 is very, very similar to the whole Y2K fiasco that went down. Everybody was in this place of fear that all our computers are going to crash and the world's going to grind to a halt and all hell's going to break loose. Well, I think a similar kind of thing is being set up for Y2012K, if you will. And I think, there's one fairly well-known former UFO lawyer investigator type who's going to jump off Bell Rock on winter solstice 2012.
Who's this?
Well, Peter Gersten, we know.
Oh, that idiot! Sure. Jesus Christ, what a potato head! You mean the guy with the purple on UFO Watchdog? Our buddy Royce Myers put him up in the purple Merlin's outfit. So this guy was a lawyer. This potato head was a lawyer.
He's the county attorney.
Really? He was a New York lawyer.
David,
he was a New York lawyer, and he actually succeeded in suing the government to recover classified UFO documents. Successful, too.
It's going to jump off of what in 2012?
Bell Rock, which is a big red rock formation here in the Sedona area. The reason why I bring it up, I didn't want to digress here. The reason why I bring it up is because people have a tendency to be led by the nose, and the culture has a tendency to program belief systems and beliefs around events and circumstances and situations. And I think the media, I turned my TV off 8 months ago. I occasionally watch a movie or something, but I just will not abide this doom and gloom that's being promulgated in the media. We're supposed to have a media that looks out for the public's interest here. Where are the Woodward and Bernsteins around 9/11, which again is probably takes my vote as the most tricksterish event of the new millennium so far. Where is that fourth column? Is it the fourth column or fifth column? I think fourth column.
Well, it's gone. Basically, it's
exactly.
It went away in the movie network. It's gone.
Yeah, exactly. I'm mad as hell, and I ain't going to take it anymore. And I let my 2-year thing to Dish Network just lapse, and I didn't sign back up. I'm so tired of all the fear mongering and all the negativity that's being force fed Western culture. To me, it's creating a belief that could be very dangerous and very powerful, even though it's not real and true. Yeah. The very belief that these horrendous things are going to happen, this crazy movie that's out right now, 2012, the #1 movie in the nation. All this stuff it's now the third
most popular movie. The vampires took over.
Oh, there you go. Okay. So, I rest my case. I think that this type of programming of the culture is extremely powerful, and I don't think enough attention is being placed on the effect of this programming process on the collective psyche. I think that we are really playing with fire by allowing our media and our the people that program us as a culture to get away with all this negativity that's happening. I don't think that 2012 we're going to be here on December 22nd, 2012. There's no doubt about it. Of course, the Maya and the Hopi and some other cultures are saying that we are headed into some pretty interesting times in terms of the health of the planet, in terms of what the planet might be up to, like shaking fleas off a dog. But again, you can't really buy into this stuff. I'm like David. I just, I try to be as rational and logical about my life and about things that I see going on in my life and all around me. I try to be as logical and rational as possible. But man, I'll tell you, we are programming some real irrational thinking into culture right now.
No
so
question.
That's why 2012 is in the title of the subtitle.
You put it in the title to sell books.
Yeah, it's not going to sell books in 2013.
It might.
Maybe you can have the special edition for 2013. If we're still around, you have the special edition of Stalking the Tricksters, special 2013 edition.
Yeah, I wish I had a $10 bill for every day the world was supposed to end and we were all going to die.
You and me both.
Okay, so establish the world's not going to die at 2012.
Well, it might. It might. You never know. The world could end tomorrow, man. The world could end tomorrow.
But then we won't have time to predict it and to basically sell movies
Thank God. Thank God. You know what? And to which I say, turn on the TV. Look at what we've done to the planet. Look what we've done to each other. Give the ants a chance.
Yeah.
Give the ants a chance. What are humans? And this is where I go all angry human at the end of the episode. Yeah. We want to, well, yeah, life out of balance. We like to think we're these noble creatures.
It's the
I'll tell you.
Well, you see, that's what, of course, Ray Palmer said a long time ago. I've said this a number of times on the show. The flying saucers are here to make us think.
Boy, at the very least, I think you're right.
I don't think they've helped Michael Sala a goddamn bit.
Well, it didn't say everybody think. There are.
I don't think Steve Greer is thinking. I think Paula Harris. Well, I don't think she's thinking either. I think she's thinking about chocolate cake. This is where I get gratuitously mean. This is the part of the show where we trash other guests. See, we're not trashing the guests we've had on after he's gone. We're trashing other guests.
Well, David, I'm really glad that you didn't. You were actually very kind and gentle, and you used lubrication with me on this interview. I was kind of cringing because I do admit that my attempt at a unified field theory for the paranormal, as I've kind of dubbed it, is it's at least a step forward in thinking, but it does have a lot of holes, and hopefully my second book will fill in some of the holes a little bit. And
you know what we're going to find out, Chris? You know what physicists are going to find out? They're going to find out that the idea of a single unified field theory is silly. There is no such thing. There is no such thing as a single unified field theory in paranormal, not in physics, not in psychology, not in biology, not in anything.
Hey, listeners, did you know that Fate is the oldest and best-known publication on the paranormal? Well, since 1948, Fate has provided their readers with fascinating, in-depth articles on subjects like psychics and spiritualists, ghosts and hauntings, UFOs and aliens, as well as readers' true personal mystical experiences. For under $20, you can keep up with all the latest information. To subscribe, call now at 1-800-728-2730 or visit Fate's website at www.fatemag.com. That's 1-800-728-2730 or www.fatemag.com. So what are you waiting for? Your fate awaits.
You've entered another dimension. You've entered the Paracast.
We're talking to Christopher O'Brien, author of Stalking the Tricksters, Shapeshifters, Skywalkers, Dark Adepts, and 2012 That We Whisper. Now, are you going to have a sequel called Finding the Tricksters, grabbing their hair, pulling their fingers, cutting off their fingernails? What will the second book be called?
The working title for my second book is Driving Miss Trickster.
Oh, boom.
Thanks. That was a joke. You got it, David. I am.
He's trying to lose it. Just a moment, please. Okay, go ahead.
I am working on a part 2 of this particular. I kind of envision it as a trilogy, really. And there's a lot of elements in the first book that I didn't cover, including the Men in Black, which I think are very important trickster forms that are a direct tie-in to the ufological mystery. And there are other areas that I didn't dive into. And I also want to have a section in there on some possible ideas and methodology to identify certain tricksterish events in your everyday life. I think coincidence and synchronicity are an indication of some sort of mechanistic process that we can possibly examine and gain some insight and possibly even utilize in our lives. And I feel inspired by the subject matter because I do feel it is a step forward. And perhaps there is no unified field theory for the paranormal, but it's sure cool to try to establish at least the possibility.
Oh yeah, sure, and absolutely.
Well, I think one of the problems that we have with the UFO field, specifically, many of the people who are involved today are repeating the same mistakes that they made back 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. I mean, if you look at UFO literature in the mid-50s, what were they writing about? They were writing about disclosure. They didn't use the word disclosure. They would talk about government secrecy. Okay, let's find out what the government knows about this. When will the spaceships land? How will we greet them? Etc., etc. Much of the conversation is the same. Yes, because it's 50 years later, the way we speak about it's a bit different. But nothing ever changes. We need some new thinking here. It's unfortunate that we got into this kind of thinking, trying to encompass a lot of mysteries with a single explanation or a few explanations back in the 60s and 70s, and then we went back to E.T.
Yep, and I think it's infinitely more complex. Of course, you can't factor in or out any ETH, in my opinion. I think that we are, involved in a very complex formula here. I think there's all kinds of operative elements that are coalescing and interrelating, their agendas, layering one upon the other. How do we know that it's not ETs using trickster tools, manners, and methodology to come and confound us? There's so much, looking at the UFO mystery, there's so much, and just tricksterism that's run rampant through it. And I think Jacques Vallée in his book, Messengers of Deception and Passage to Magonia, brought out some very good points. John Keel brought out some very good points. But nowhere do they ever equate some sort of trickster force or trickster mechanism as being somehow related to this. And I would like to think that I'm at least making a well-intentioned attempt to take this whole thing a step forward and get out of the box and look at it in a new and creative way.
Well, part of the problem with John Keel is that he came up with great ideas, but he wasn't a really good researcher. So it's easy to pick apart his arguments, some of his evidence. And that's what some people who are more dedicated to the craft of pure research are doing. And that's why when we had our John Keel memorial, they said, well, he was a crusty old man. His research wasn't good, but we liked him anyway. Let's have a toast, and that's the end of it. But that is very much what a lot of people said about John Keel.
Yeah, but at least he attempted to look at things, I think, with fresh pair of glasses on, and I do feel that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. I'm really attempting to take the ball maybe a little further down the field. I'm hoping at the very least to inspire people to look at their reality possibly with a new, fresh pair of glasses, to get creative in their thinking, to maybe get outside of the box a little bit, and. Like I said, my theory does have holes in it, but hey, somebody's got to start thinking creatively, and somebody's got to start looking at these things in new and different ways. In ufology, we're, as you pointed out, Gene, we're not very much further down the road than we were 60 years ago. So I think this is, at the very least, this is what I'm attempting to do, and I feel jazzed by this particular approach. I feel it does, in some sense, pass the smell test, and I do feel that there's some fertile ground here that should be explored.
Well, one of the things that was brought up on last week's show with James Carrion of MUFON is the fact that there's government disinformation involved in different aspects of the UFO mystery. So is the government serving the function of a trickster in some respects?
Well, I don't think there's much question about that. Obviously, government is here to protect us and in some way, shape, or form control us. And by, acknowledging that they're more confused than we are, they're actually doing themselves a disservice by admitting that they don't know what's going on, admitting they're not in control of our airspace or in control of the process. So if it is truly other and it's not some sort of exotic secret, technology that we're dealing with here, which I seriously doubt that it's to the extent some people would think it is. I don't think all UFO sightings by any stretch are tax dollars. But if the government is as confused as we are, then obviously they're going to try to co-opt and marginalize the field by providing disinformation and manipulating groups and doing their control games. I think that's a very, an obvious thing that's going on personally.
Well, it's like hiding in plain sight and putting a lot of garbage into the playground, so nobody knows what the garbage is and what the real stuff is.
Yeah, well, that's where good filtering, shows like the Paracast, I think, are for people that are getting started in this field. I really feel that this is a great resource for youngsters who want to get involved in this, want to get past the pop culture programming. Not enough creative thinking is going on right now in the paranormal realm. And we didn't really have a chance to talk about some of my haunted site investigations that I've been doing over the past 5 years. And I feel that there's a lot of exciting scientific work that's being done in the field, but I think we really have to take it. We have to tighten the belt up one notch and really get creative in our thinking and use the powers of analytical science and scientific investigation to get a little better handle on what we're dealing with.
Yeah, speaking
Amen.
of trickster things, I'll just drop this one thing, and of course everybody could say it's ridiculous, but years ago I had a really beautiful fire engine red car built, all the options and everything. I certainly spent more money than I had. And I said, you know what? I'm going to have fun. I'm going to have a custom license plate. 3MIB. Okay, obviously for 3 Men in Black. Talk about tricksters. This was the worst car I'd ever owned. Within 1,000 miles, the transmission fluid leaked. The transmission had to be rebuilt. It never stopped rattling. Need I go on?
Oh, careful what you wish for.
Sometimes a lemon's a lemon, you know?
This was a fire engine red Pontiac, by the way. Of course, Pontiac.
You bought a car based on its color?
No. We discussed it at the time, and we said, let's have a red car. It's like that. You decide, all right, we have a silver car now. Then we had a red car. All right. For a number of years, we had white cars. And we haven't had a red car since then.
What kind of ending of the show is this? How did we go so far off the rails?
You know what? This entire topic is off the rails because we don't know where it's supposed to take us. Sure.
Yeah.
The sister has arrived.
Aye, lad, it goes with the territory you do.
I guess so. Well,
I love James Carry-On's when he started out on his appearance where he said, well, we don't have conferences on leprechauns, so we got to have conferences on UFOs. I
think there are conferences on leprechauns, though, aren't there? I think there are.
Probably. You go to Glastonbury, there's a lot of New Agers that are still in touch with their elemental side.
Look, bottom line is that, and we get attacked all the time now, more often than not, the Paracast is being attacked randomly online about, trying to stake the claim that we know what's going on. And it's kind of an interesting sign to me when people say that, because it's clear to me that they're not listening to the show. We don't have a clue of what's going on here. We don't understand any of this stuff. I have never come on the show and said to Gene, I have the answer. I know why A and B and C are A, B, and C. We don't have any answers. I mean, we really, truly, we search for them. We try to engage in sometimes reasonable conversations. Sometimes it's hard to do it. The burnout factor on this stuff, I think, is very high. I'm actually amazed that people spend as much time as they do reading about this material, because sometimes I just get to the point where I don't want to read another word about this stuff. I just want to go play some weird software synthesizer or screw around with Photoshop. It's like this stuff gets to be so much. And again, it's like, to take any kind of a stance where you're questioning things is somehow seen as you not, your questioning is challenging, and challenging is not good. And to me, that erosion of critical thinking